Hi, this is Carrie, and I'm here with Robert, who does the historical tours of Greater Holyoke. He offers both public and private tours of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, Chicopee, and South Hadley, Mass. You can find out more information on his tours and check out some of his videos and photos, as well as his upcoming schedule at holyokecanaltour.org. You can also email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And today we're going to be talking about the St. Jerome's Church campus. So, what is with the gravestone to the right of the church?
All right. There used to be three pastors of churches in Holyoke that were buried along the side of their church. They were all Catholic priests. Michael Howard, the first pastor of Holy Rosary Church, was buried along this church. But when the church was taken down in 1974, they moved his grave to Calvary Cemetery. There also was another pastor, Andre Dufresne, who was the first pastor of Precious Blood Church in Holyoke. He was buried alongside his church. When that church was taken down in 1989, they moved him to the Precious Blood Cemetery in South Hadley, Massachusetts. One church still has their pastor buried alongside it, and that is at the St. Jerome's Church in Holyoke, Massachusetts. What happened here was he died. He had built up the church from absolute scratch. He was the first Catholic pastor of Holyoke. He started in 1856 to get parishioners together. They helped to build the church. It was finished by 1860. He only served for about a year or so after that, but never was he able to serve a mass in the church because he was very sick. His name is Jeremiah O'Callahan. He was so loved by his parishioners that upon his death, before his death, he gave the desire to be buried in the crypt in the basement of church. They weren't able to do that because it was very expensive, so they did the next best thing, and they buried him along the edge of the right side of the church. They have a big memorial stone for him there. It's very nice to read that stone. So he's the only pastor left. He was the first, and he will be the last. I think someday if they ever take down St. Jerome's, I hope they leave him there and make a park so people could see him there and not move his body like they did the others.
So, now, why does the campus fit in so well with the neighborhood?
Because the church came first, and everything came after. And also because the park was there, and then all the land around it was owned by the Holyoke Water Power Company. And they distributed at a need basis. They gave some to St. Jerome's Church, and then they gave more to them, and then they gave more to more entities. And so everything built up nicely in the park and nicely around the church. And also, because it was so beautiful in that area, by intent, Holyoke desired to make it and keep it beautiful, and so it's really kept up. Also, a lot of people loved Holyoke so much that they wanted to build nice houses around that area. Some of the houses are gone, sadly, but some of the nicest houses still remain.
So, now, what did Patrick Harkins do for the campus?
All right. He was a third pastor, and he was a pastor for 44 years at St. Jerome's. He was called the builder. He built so much for this church. It's incredible. I'll list some of them, but every one of what he built is on one of my tours, and some of them have their own tour. So what he built was a nice school system. The school system included the St. Jerome's Institute, which was for boys. He built up the first girls' school. That girls' school was where the main convent is. He built up two convents, two because the first nuns he got in could not teach boys, and so he had to get another set of nuns in that could teach the boys. So there's two sets of nuns, two orders of nuns here. He also built up a home for old women that was behind the convent, and that was called the Patrick Harkins Home for Elderly Women. He also built up the Providence Hospital from scratch. The first hospital was in South Hadley, but after a year, it moved into an old home on what was across from where the modern post office was. He built that up, and then it was taken out at some point, and right in front of it built a new Providence Hospital. And he had it built up with his friend J.J. O'Connell, who was a medical doctor in Holyoke. He also built up what was called the St. Jerome's Temperance Society, and that was for men. It was a building on Maple Street. It's still there. Its facade has been expanded upon, but he built that up in order to give the men something better to do with their lives after work, which means it was made into a library. It was made into a musical society, and you could tell by it, he had a much longer name to it at some point. It was not only for temperance, but it was a mutual society where men could donate when a man or woman of the parish lost their spouse. It was also a library. It was a place where men could come and socialize. It was a place that men could be nice to each other, a benevolent society where they could not only be nice to each other, but also donate to society. And then...
So tell us about the Providence Hospital.
What? Are you almost done?
So tell us about the Providence Hospital.
The Providence Hospital grew and grew from Patrick Harkins doing. He had gone to see an old woman who was having some illness, and he asked the woman's landlady, why does she get medical help? And the woman said to him, because she's a Catholic and who cares? And so from that, he decided with his friend to build up a hospital for, first of all, in South Hadley for 1 year for tuberculosis boys, and then in Holyoke and the old Delaney house across from the post office. And it built up and built up, and it lasted for 149 years as a Providence Hospital. So he got the first hospital ever in Holyoke. The first hospital was not Holyoke Hospital. It was a Providence Hospital. And that was from 1873 onwards. So that's an incredible doing.
Now, do you have a connection to this campus?
Yep, I went to the high school here, Holyoke Catholic High School, for 4 years. Plus, I did my first tour ever 8 years ago in Holyoke, and it was at the St. Jerome's campus. So this was the start of all my tours. And so this is the base of what I do. One of my more popular tours is through Veterans Park, but I love the St. Jerome's tour. I do it, I've only done it twice, and people seem to love it. They love this church. And just by going to school there and being a cross-country runner, I was able to learn, by running all the streets, learn the history of Holyoke on these streets. And one of my places I ran around White Street Reservoir became my third tour. And so a lot of connections to this campus. Thank you.
Well, thank you for letting us know about that. And again, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org or email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And hopefully you'll check out some of our other podcasts we have. Thank you.
Well, it's the first Catholic cemetery in Holyoke, and thus, for in the beginning, it must have had all immigrant groups that were Catholics being buried there, not only the Irish. The second one that opened for a Holyoke Catholic church was that of Precious Blood Church, which opened in 1875. So for 9 years, this was also a burial place for French Canadians besides the Irish. Another thing to know is that Catholic churches do not bury people that have not been baptized in this body of the cemetery. So if you had a child that died very young, they would be buried somewhere towards the back. Another thing to look out for is that very poor people weren't necessarily buried in St. Jerome's if they went to St. Jerome's Church. They would have been buried in the Calvary Cemetery of Chicopee because that was a location for Catholics that couldn't afford to pay for the funeral or might have gone to St. Jerome's but was in the institution of the Catholic Church, such an orphanage, an elderly home, whether for men or women. And thus, they're not necessarily going to be buried here. Now, St. Jerome's was very good because they did have a very strong fraternal group called the St. Jerome's Temperance Union. And it was able to, if people were poor, to pay for the burial of a lot of these indigent people. So, if you're a genealogist, watch out for all these things.
Now, what is the layout of the cemetery?
It's in the style of a lawn cemetery. So it may be large, but it's a very simple layout. Towards the back of the old part, towards the south, are some of the very old single burials. But some of the family burials that are very old, they're along the eastern edge of the cemetery, along St. Jerome's Avenue. It's not in the layout of a garden or rural cemetery like the Forestdale Cemetery of Holyoke, which is across the street from St. Jerome's Cemetery, which is a very fancy, curving roads, beautiful trees. St. Jerome's Cemetery is a very simple layout. Now, the modern burials are all along the western half. They're easy to find. So if you're a genealogist looking for the old burials, go towards the east.
Now, who are some of the important individuals in this cemetery?
Okay, there's Patrick Harkins here. He was the pastor of St. Jerome's Church for 44 years. He is the one that started up Providence Hospital. He is the one that started up an old age home for women. He is the one that made the school system for both boys and girls at St. Jerome's. And he is the one that got the Sisters of Providence to come from Ontario, province of Canada, to Holyoke. And that was a great thing because they became social worker and nurses, and they have served Holyoke now for 167 years, which is an incredible feat. Now, besides all that, Patrick Harkins became friends with a doctor named J.J. O'Connor. And J.J. helped him greatly because he's the one that got Patrick Harkins to open up things like the hospital, the orphanages, the elderly homes. And this J.J. O'Connor was also mayor of Holyoke for a couple of years, and he started up a surgical hospital right by Veterans Park. So he did a great deal of things, and he's probably the second most important. There is a priest circle right in front of an enormous cross, and there you'll also find some very important people.
And now, where were the Catholics buried before 1866?
Yeah, it's a good question because Catholics were coming to Western Massachusetts since the 1820s when the Chicopee Falls Canal opened up. It would have canal diggers that were from Ireland. And when the mill started there, you had more Catholics coming from Ireland. So where are the Catholics of Holyoke buried for 1866? They're buried in Chicopee. They're at one of two cemeteries. One of them started in 1852. It's called the Calvary Cemetery in Chicopee. It's on Hampden Street. Now, if you follow Hampden Street and go up about 150 yards more, you do cross the border into Springfield. But there you'll find the St. Matthew's Cemetery, which is the oldest Catholic cemetery in Western Massachusetts. It was made probably about 1845. It is a filled up cemetery, but you wouldn't know it by looking at it because there's hardly any markers. And yet there's thousands of people in there. So the early Holyoke people are buried here. I know that 1848, in what was then called Ireland Parish and would become Holyoke, there was an epidemic called cholera. And out of 1,200 people that were living out in nature at a park that was called Cary Park back then, but became Pulaski Park, there, again, were 1,200 people. 300 people died August, September, and October of 1848 and had to be brought across a ferry to Chicopee and be buried in his Calvary Cemetery.
So,
Well, one more thing I would like to comment upon is this. One person is not buried in the cemetery, and he was St. Jerome's first pastor. He's buried along the southeastern corner of St. Jerome's Church. And that's because there was always a tradition before 1900 to bury the founding Catholic pastor of a church alongside the church itself. 3 pastors of Holyoke were buried in that fashion. 2 were moved much later when the church was taken down, but he is still in place. His name is Jeremiah O'Callahan. Thank you for listening to my podcast.
yep, again, thank you for tuning in.